this kind of invitation to be here, and I am really feel proud to be here, and particularly in the land of Elvis. Isn't it that isn't it always I wanted to come and see isn't it this phenomenon? Actually, I was thinking today that maybe what we are talking about today, actually the main message that that hopefully everyone can take home, is like we are in the route of Elvis, probably on the young Elvis, isn't it? Because the message that we are trying to deliver here when we talk about the environment can affect the brain, the genetics of the brain, essentially what we are saying is how important can be the way that we perceive the environment, and essentially Elvis, that's what happened to him. I'm talking about the young Elvis, isn't it? He was able actually to turn happiness into a lot of expression of arts and music, and he was able to take a lot of advantage of this. Unfortunately, on the last days, he lost his homeostasis that we call in science, which actually is the equilibrium that we have with the environment, isn't it? And he lose control of himself, and we can spend a few hours analyzing his personality, but essentially the idea is that the path was trying to develop here also is that it's very important, isn't it, to keep an equilibrium with what we do, with what we eat. And there is not any special formulation, isn't it? I don't want you, or Pat, I think doesn't expect you that you will run to the supermarket, isn't it, just to start eating like crazy, whatever we tell you here. So the message, isn't it, I mean, think about this and try to manage your life, and in terms of it can be helpful to you. So anyway, after the wonderful lecture that the Pat already delivered, I assume that everyone knows what we have here, isn't it? Yeah, isn't it? Yeah. We came out with a story with one of the reporters at The Economist a few months ago, and actually it was very crazy because we developed this in a few hours, working with them, and in terms of, isn't it, what type of foods can affect the brain, and isn't it, and you already can identify certain pieces here, isn't it, the cerebral cortex, isn't it, is an area that very important for cognition, and here we had the hippocampus, an area in the brain very important for learning and memory. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about today is related to learning and memory. And in the reality, we are what we eat, isn't it, in terms of we can actually make several changes in the brain based on the type of food that we are eating. And again, the idea here is that doesn't happen immediately. A lot of these take times, and actually already Pat described, isn't it, what is a neuron, but essentially we have millions of neurons in the brain, and many connections among neurons, and all what we see here, isn't it, that there's so many connectivity, or cell phones as she calls, and the communication between neurons is incredibly important. That's called the synapse, in which actually there is transmission information going from one neuron to the next. And that actually happened to be one of the most fragile structures in the brain, isn't it? Whenever there is a problem, or we are having, I mean, like any type of medication, most of the medication, in order to affect the brain function, are related to the synapse. So anyway, we have millions of neurons under communication. We have so Another thought that I think Pat already developed somehow, isn't it? The question I always try to I remember when I started working on diet, I try to understand, you say, why diet can be important and why this and this and this. One point that we need to understand here, isn't it? We need to think of this in terms of 1,000 of years or even million of years that has taken, isn't it, to develop what we are right now. And what we are right now is a process of, I would say, as I said, many thousand of years. And for one thing, biology and genes in the brain and in the body is very conservative. Actually, the genes that we have now are very, very similar to the one that they existed thousands of years ago in the brain. So that's for one thing, isn't it, that the brain is relatively the same. However, the lifestyle is changing. So what it means, like the way are feeding the brain, isn't it, with a different type of food, and the brain was made to be fed with other type of food, isn't it? And so essentially, and you can see that the diet how much has changed in terms of the lifestyle that we have. We don't have time, isn't it, to be cooking or go to the supermarket. We just eat, isn't it, in fast food and everything. We don't really do we don't do that much exercise as we need. And that's something very important for the brain capacity. And I think Pat already went through this, isn't it, that how food can affect the brain. And she already spoke about the concept of building material. And that's the reality when she was talking about DHA. It's actually a building material. DHA is part of the membranes, and this is a synapse, as I mentioned. This is the site of contact between two neurons, and the DHA is part of the membrane here, and there are many reactions which are really important in order to modify what we do. And she spoke about energy, isn't it, that we need to provide energy for many processes. Some other processes are quite important, like immune function, that I don't have time to be talking about this. And there is another concept here, which she mentioned also, which is the cognitive reserve. And I think that's quite important to understand if we try to understand the effect of food on the brain. Maybe now with the economy, the best example is to explain that in terms of money. It's like putting money into the bank. Unfortunately, now can disappear, the money that we put in the bank. It's not, but actually, I can give you an example that also may happen. Anyway, we had this concept of cognitive reserve. What it means, like the type of food that we are eating, the food that we are eating, if we are making the brain better on everyday life, we are building a reserve that we are not going to be able to see until we need it, because all of these changes are very small. But I promise that you will need it, I will need it, isn't it, certain point. When we get sick or we get older, isn't it, we need more cognitive reserve, and then we can see the difference. So anyway, that's the concept, and I am going to introduce one component here that I try not to complicate the story, that it has been very important to understand the effect of food on the brain. And this is a molecule called a brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. The importance of this molecule that is released at the site of contact between two neurons. But the most interesting here is that this molecule is being released by the effect of electrical activity. Just for your information, you may know already that information in the brain and spinal cord is transmitted as electrical activity. So what it means, like we think or we move an arm, that's what happened, isn't it? There is an activation of the cells here. And so it's very interesting that this molecule is released by neuronal activity, and also it's very well known that this molecule is also very important for growth. So when we are saying, for example, when Pat was saying, okay, this is related to growth of cells, so one potential mechanism, isn't it, like if anything that we do is affecting specific molecules and can act in this way. I don't want to give you the impression that this is the only molecule in the brain that can do this. There may be others, but it's an interesting way to go. Anyway, I am going to start with the bad news first, and which are kind of interesting. I started working on diet, I would say 7 years ago, and I had the chance to collaborate with someone who was working with some formulation of food that very similar to the type of junk food that we can have at the McDonald's, for example, or other restaurants. So it was very high in saturated fat, the same that the Pat already explained, and sugar, sucrose. So essentially these were experiments in rats that we expose animals for certain periods of time, and what we did was to measure levels of this molecule that I mentioned to you that is important for learning and memory. So we measured the levels of these molecules in the hippocampus, an area important for learning and memory. So essentially what we found that the longer that we keep the animals on this junk food diet, the lower the levels of this BDNF. We kept the animals up to 2 years, and you see this is the control value, and the values kept decreasing up to 2 years here. We also measured one test for learning and memory, which is called the Morris-Water maze. We are testing a very specific type of memory, and I think Pat already explained, isn't it, that it's not that simple, the thing, because when we are talking about cognition, there are so many things which are important. But anyway, this is a single test, and I am telling this to you also. You don't think, if you have been going to the McDonald's, don't start thinking, oh, I am stupid. Still, there is a lot of chances that that cannot happen, isn't it? But I am going to give you some potential, isn't it, solution to the problem by the end. And anyway, we did that type of a study, which actually was very striking for us in terms of the action of this food. And as I said, and also Pat said, and also I mentioned in terms of the cognitive research concept, isn't it? I mean, a lot of these changes, isn't it, if we eat one hamburger at the McDonald's, it's not going to happen, isn't it, that you say, oh, really, I feel so stupid right now, isn't it? Isn't it? It's something that it's something that may develop, I mean, in a long time, in many different ways. So in terms of that, we wanted to really test, and that's why we use animal models for this, because we have a simple test to measure something specific. So essentially what we did, as I said, many things are unnoticed. I mean, the effect of something can be unnoticed. We don't realize until we need it. So we tried to create a condition in rodents in which the animal could need really the help of the diet. And so for this we use a type of traumatic brain injury, which is actually very similar to what can happen in a traffic accident by shaking the head, or like in boxing, isn't it, like there is not a direct damage to the brain, it's just it's a concussion. And that's what we did. And I don't want to complicate too much, but the results were actually that the animals that they were eating this saturated fat diet, and they had received the lesion, were the ones that they had the lowest levels of this molecule BDNF. And also, when we perform this test for learning and memory in rats, so we found that the worst group was the group that they had been receiving this type of lesion in the brain, and they had been eating the bad diet relative to the regular diets of the animal. So anyway, very striking finding, and we performed many studies with this type of diet, and practically all the results were very negative. I mean, really bad news in general in terms of what this diet could do to the brain. So so then we decided to switch to have a better news, isn't it? And we switched to work on type of diet that they could provide solutions to problems. And here again, I think Pat already introduced very well the omega-3 fatty acid diet, and particularly the DHA component of the diet, and which actually has many important functions for the body and also for the brain. And she already mentioned that is present in fish, particularly salmon. And for one particular thing is the DHA is very high in the brain, and actually is an important component of membranes. If for any reason there is no DHA in the brain, we get in trouble, isn't it? And for this, there have been studies. Already Pat mentioned a lot of the work done in development that she has done, very beautiful work. But there are many studies also in terms of what can do this diet in adulthood, and also the lack of fish consumption. So some studies have been done at the NIH, like Hervin, for example. He has published a lot of studies looking at the human populations from different countries, and he has found actually very interesting results, like the countries that they have a very low consumption of the fish, there is a high level of depression, isn't it? I mean, as you know, Japan has a high consumption of fish, but there are countries like here, like Germany, for example, particularly Eastern Europe, that has a very low consumption of fish, and has been very well correlated to signs of depression. And as I already tried to explain to you, that a lot of the significance of this can be perceived if we think about the evolution of the brain, isn't it? If we are thinking, isn't it, from primitive primates many thousands of years ago, how we developed the brain that we have now. There are many hypotheses that this DHA may have played a very important role in terms of the building material that in order to support a large brain. And also there are several issues here in terms of conservation of energy, isn't it, like I say, like there is a sort of concept of green technology, isn't it, trying to be more modern right now, isn't it, in the sense of that the brain, one of the functions of the brain is also to conserve energy, which actually is very important, isn't it, for biology in general. And for one other thing that I am going to be discussing a little bit, that the diet, I mean, we already discussed, I mean, food is very important, isn't it? But I think we have to think more globally, like we do other things besides eating, isn't it? I don't know, you name it, isn't it? We have to, we use locomotion to mobilize ourselves. have intellectual challenges, and we sleep, and many things. So you have to think about that a lot of these different type of stimulation to the brain may be working together. And that's what I like to provide some discussion. So for one thing, isn't it, if we are talking about building material to the brain, and in terms of the evolution of the brain, this has been quite important, isn't it? I mean, you can compare the brain, for example, of a rhinoceros, for example, relative to the body, isn't it? And you can compare the size of the brain of the human. So essentially, encephalization, I mean, the development of the brain is so important for what we call now being human, but requires a lot of building material that you have to think about, that we need to get it somehow. So as I said, also, if we want to test the effect of diet in a short period of time, so we need to really think, isn't it, a paradigm to do that. And for this experiment, what we did actually was to repeat the other one, in which you use this test for learning and memory in animal. And we found here, in summary, the results were that the animals that had been eating the fish oil that contained DHA, they were close to normal animals, and these are the animals that received the diet. So anyway, the value here is what it takes for the animal to learn this particular paradigm. I don't want to complicate the thing too much, but take my word that that essentially what it does, what it has been shown, that a reduction in the time to learn this task is what people relate to learning and memory. So, but anyway, the finding here is like the diet, the animal that has been lesioned has been eating the diet that contained DHA for certain time before. I believe in this experiment were like 3 or 4 weeks before we performed the lesion. And what it means also that the diet is sort of protecting the brain for the effects of the lesion. Then I like to move to the point here that what I said, eating is one of the aspects of what we do on our life, but there are many others. So anyway, this is a typical picture thousands of years ago, isn't it, when we were in more equilibrium with the environment that we developed. And actually there were many functions, isn't it? The primates at the moment, they had to really do many things that we don't do now, isn't it, in order to get food. Isn't it, now we just go to the supermarket, we don't even walk to the supermarket, we drive the car to the supermarket, isn't it? But at the time the people had to walk, I mean, a lot of distance to find this and use their legs and everything, and also the environment was quite different. Isn't it, now we live in a room, isn't it, that we don't see that much the exterior, we feed our brain with other type of stimulations, isn't it, like television, and so quite different, many differences. So anyway, I like to switch here what can be some type of connection between exercise and diet, isn't it? So exercise has been in the news for a few years already in terms of the effect of exercise can have on the brain. Many articles have been written, and this actually was very striking. This article in Newsweek decided to take a shot on the exercise and the brain a couple of years ago, and several other articles in many scientific journals in terms of what can be the effects of building some brain power through exercise. So anyway, what are the effects of exercise on the brain? If we do an experiment, I am not going to explain to you the whole thing here, but essentially now we have the technology to map so many genes and proteins in the brain, and essentially the experiment that we have done a few years ago. So essentially what we did, we put animals to exercise and we extract the brain tissue and we performed some proteomic analysis here in order to compare exercise versus sedentary. And essentially there were a lot, each dot is a particular protein. And there were a lot of differences in terms of the proteins that they were highlighted with exercise. And so we were able to map many proteins in the brain, and we realized that many of them were related to learning and memory, and we built many maps and pathways of the brain by which exercise could affect the brain. So one thing which was interesting, that a lot of the proteins that they were activated by exercise were very similar or the same to the proteins that people are studying mechanisms or learning and memory. So a lot of studies to explain how learning and memory takes place in the brain. They already have identified many of these proteins. And anyway, what we learned here, that exercise was activating the same proteins that and by the way, this is the synapse that I mentioned before, is the place that the information goes across to cells in the brain. So we performed another experiment, which was to see whether there could be any synergism, isn't it? How, as I said, we eat and we do exercise, and we found that we did this experiment against in rodent. And we expose animals to run. This animal, for example, we expose an animals to eat, but they didn't run. And we expose animals to eat the DHA diet and to run at the same time. So we found that the one that they had the shortest time to learn the platform, to learn this learning and memory test, were the animals in which we were combining the DHA diet and exercise. We also performed these experiments using animals that have received the lesion into the brain, and also we found that the animal that there was the most protection were the animals that they were receiving the diet, DHA, plus the exercise. So anyway, showing how the diet and exercise could interact with each other. And this is just one of the ways that this DHA and exercise can interact with each other. So we look at more closely the hippocampus. So this is the area, as I mentioned, is very important for learning and memory. And we work with some proteins that are very important for the transmission of information across cells, and also that these proteins have been found to be under the control of the DHA diet. So essentially what we found, that the animal that they were eating the DHA and were exercising relative to the animal that they ate the normal diet and didn't exercise, they have more of these proteins in the hippocampus. I don't know, suggesting, isn't it, that this can be one of the many ways, isn't it, by which diet and exercise can interact with each other in order to modify the brain. And I think this is the last one. So going back again to the bad news of the beginning, isn't it, I already showed to you that going to McDonald's can be bad for the brain. Isn't it, like this is the high-fat diet, saturated fat diet, that the animals actually took a long time to learn the platform relative to the regular diet. So what we did in this experiment, So we put the animal to eat the bad diet and at the same time to exercise. And so we found here that as we expected, exercise alone could be improved learning and memory in these animals. And also there would be an increase of these molecules, BDNF. The most interesting here is that the animals that they had been eating the bad diet and that were exercising, their performance was very close to the control animals here, isn't it? And also the levels of the BDNF were higher. So essentially the idea is you decide to go to McDonald's, don't drive, isn't it? Walk, isn't it? Or run to the McDonald's, and you may get the benefit, isn't it, of the exercise and eating the hamburger as well. So in order to finish, so what we are learning with this, this is our situation, isn't it? And this is the main question, isn't it, that between sometimes can be so dramatic for us, isn't it? Because the question between being healthy and being sick, isn't it? And this is the question, isn't it? I have no clue where I am in this equation right now, because we have many surprises in life, isn't it? Tomorrow something can happen. So the question is where we are here in this course, isn't it? And this is the threshold for the appearance of symptoms. So essentially, we are all the time between here and here. So essentially, the final answer to the question, as we mentioned already and Pat mentioned, has a lot to do with the genes that we had. And that's actually very striking. Some people, we hear of many people, isn't it, that they smoke and they don't do any exercise. They eat at the McDonald's every day, and they can live 110 years, isn't it? But essentially, if we are not that type of situation, if we are not in that type of situation, I think we have to pay a lot of attention to what we do, because we need to protect our genes, isn't it? And actually this is completely true. I mean, this has been shown in using many models already, that the interaction between genes and lifestyle can actually change the course of this ball. And I can tell you, the National Institute of Health declared the decade of the practically mapping every single gene in the body, I think was between 1990 to the year 2000. So now we know practically all the genes in the body, isn't it? And there were a lot of hopes that after that we could cure Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson, and many things. And we are still under the same situation after knowing, isn't it, all genes. So the NIH actually is sort of a step back right now and thinking about this, isn't it? How can we change this equation? Isn't it? How we can really protect the body and protect the brain and keep the system healthy. I think this is the last slide. So anyway, in terms of the brain, we mentioned that it requires a constant nurturing, isn't it? So this is dendrite in the brain that it has a lot of spines, which means a lot of connection, possibility to have a lot of connections, and we have another one, this is an unhealthy neuron that has lost a lot of the connections. So anyway, there is something from here to here, isn't it, that actually we decide what's going to happen. It's not going to be in one day, it's going to be, isn't it, the product of a longer time. And the healthy brain, isn't it, can turn into, we can turn the sedentary lifestyle and the unhealthy diet can actually produce a brain which is unhealthy. And I am proposing that the diet, exercise, and other interventions that are not that difficult to do can actually reverse the process in order to make it more effective. So that's what I have to say, and so anyway, so as the final message, isn't it? Try to think about this in a global way, isn't it? Don't think, isn't it, that as I said, don't rush to think that there is a single solution is more difficult than that. So, any question?